Good morning, everyone, and welcome to IGTV. With us this morning is Mark Kappers, and Mark is going to be talking about the InfraGard insights on outsourcing and cloud sourcing issues and pitfalls. Go ahead, Mark. Take it away.
Good morning, Joe. This morning on Practical InfoSec, I talk about outsourcing, and some of the issues and pitfalls that go along with it. Cloud sourcing is a very hot kind of new buzz, but as we get into it, we'll see it's pretty much the same things you got to worry about with outsourcing. You really need to bring it and apply to your cloud sourcing efforts too. Granted, the tools do make for very attractive solutions for a variety of reasons. So quickly getting a bit of background on me, I spent many years at Electronic Data Systems prior to Hewlett Packard's buyout of EDS, and I spent a lot of time doing outsourcing for our clients, both on the client server, the network infrastructure side, as well as after I got into security, our security services across our global information security practice. So quickly, just to give a broad step back for outsourcing, we tend to focus on IT, but remember, outsourcing is, in general business terms, it's any internal service or function you're moving to an outside entity. And traditionally, to use outsourcing, the function is contracted to a vendor either specializing in those areas or specializing in a broad variety of areas. And usually the function of the service is done so for typically strategic and cost reasons. You'll hear things like, you're going to focus the organization on its core competencies, which is generally true. Things that can be outsourced, marketing, HR, billing, payroll, accounting, your taxes, physical plant, landscaping, maintenance, cleaning, physical security, and our favorite, information technology. And I'm going to lump telecommunications into IT, which may make the telecom people happy or the IT people unhappy. I'm not sure which. Talking now about what is cloud sourcing. Well, cloud sourcing is basically outsourcing, but it's kind of a new twist on an old game. And by that, what you're seeing is, with the internet now being pretty ubiquitous, IT applications and IT services, even common office operating platforms, can now be provisioned and supplied from the cloud, from the internet, from providers sitting on the internet, and typically they're packaged services. To borrow NIST's definition of cloud computing is a model for enabling convenient on-demand network access to a shared pool of configurable resources, servers, network storage, etc., that can be rapidly provisioned and released with minimal management effort on the part of the organization and typically minimal interaction with the service provider. These are very rapid things to turn on and deploy. So when we talk about some of the criteria about what makes it a cloud service, NIST wrote a terrific paper. I'll include the links up in the chat after the talk. There are 5 elements that kind of outline the criteria for a cloud service. It's on-demand and it's self-service. It's ubiquitous network access, meaning you typically get to it over the internet. Obviously, if you have a large private internet connection, you use that. But your users can be out there wherever they are and go across the internet to get to these things. You resource pool. There's a good bit of logistical elasticity. So you may turn on a certain application for one department and realize, I want it across my enterprise, and you can quickly turn that around and get that. Or if there's a certain time delay or time band in which you need to use these services, you can use them from here to there. So it's very scalable in a lot of different ways. And it's kind of a metered service. It's, like on demand from your cable provider. As you use and consume these things, you get billed and charged for that usage. Right now, there are 3 kind of classic service models for cloud computing, and that's software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. There is a 4th that is emerging, and you're beginning to see this from provider, and that's business process as a service. As the cloud providers and as companies move their ability to provision services using cloud-type architectures, you're going to see a lot more canned business process services available to you. And again, going into the deployment of cloud, typically it's public, which is, everybody can get to it. Private, which is only your organization can get to it. Community, your organization and your third parties in your agreed to community, or there are hybrid configurations available. And again, I'll have the NIST documents on their criteria around cloud computing, and they are certainly pushing government and other people to use this type of model. And some of the advantages that go along with that, if you're an organization that's looking to use cloud services, you've got better distributed denial of service protection in most cases, because now you're across the internet with these services. You certainly, most of these providers have very good VLAN capabilities, and a lot of things like perimeter security is cooked into the solution. So as you consume these things, your provider who is giving you this package already has to worry about your IDS, your firewall, the authentication schemes, and antivirus and some of these other things. So as long as you do your due diligence in picking your vendors, you should, there are some advantages of consuming these types of services. So now moving into the classic questions about, should you outsource or cloud source? A lot of that is going to depend on what you're trying to accomplish. And there are a few questions that you need to ask yourself, especially from an IT security perspective, before you go forward and decide or pull the trigger on this. Is, do you understand what it is you're trying to outsource? Do you have a really good handle on the type of service? If it's a limited service like email, you kind of know what email is, but moving down that path a little bit, can you quantify that service or that function's criticality to the organization? If you don't have email available, how heavy dependent is your business on email or this service? Is there critical information or confidential information that goes across it? And can you quantify your data assets involved in their criticality to the organization? So moving down that path, I talk again and again through these talks about understanding your data assets, understanding, what the confidentiality, integrity, availability are for all of these things, and how do you measure that? And make sure you understand how you measure your confidentiality or any of these axes of the data assets, and understand how you measure that. Also understand what your regulatory requirements are and how you measure those. So then when you go to the next step, which is looking at the service or function, and this is where a lot of the heavy lifting is. Part of the reason a lot of people outsource is, it's not something that you're necessarily good at in-house, or you want to spend money and resources on to do for yourself when you can go and, get that service from somebody else. Very few people make their own cars from scratch. We typically go to a car dealer and buy them assembled. There are a lot of people out there with the mechanical expertise who could build one from scratch. I wouldn't recommend it. So again, when you look at a service or an application, do you have the metrics by which to understand the quality of the service in terms of the actual business functionality, as well as what are the requirements around your security posture for that service? And again, you're looking at confidentiality, integrity, availability, and how your regulatory posture applies and your security policies apply to that thing. And again, metrics rules the day here. If you can't measure it, you're not going to be able to go to a vendor and say, I need this type of black box, and it needs to do these things, and it needs to be up 99.9% of the time or 99.99% of the time. That 0.09 can make a huge difference. And if you don't understand your business model and how you intend to measure those things, you may ultimately find yourself in a bit of a bad situation should something go wrong, because you're not measuring it and you don't understand how that service operates. Moving down the next sort of branch of issues with having gone through the exercise, now you need to evaluate the vendor and the provider. And again, with most vendors, it's all about service levels. In classical outsourcing or cloud sourcing or anything that you're giving to a third party, you need to understand how those service levels that you and they are agreeing to function. Do they meet or exceed your criteria for both your policies, your standards, and your metrics? How are those metrics tracked and reported? How frequently do you get and review those reports? What happens if a vendor fails to meet that criteria? You need to understand that, and you need to have that documented. Unfortunately, and a lot of times the documents need to be in legal contracts or user agreements, etc., which you need to make sure you get your legal staff involved to understand that they have teeth. Can the service or function be brought back in-house or transferred to another service provider quickly in the event of a failure or a breach or a disaster? And then following on that, you need to do assessment and validations of the vendor's solution and infrastructure, and you need to do that. Traditionally, SAS 70 audits are usually used, or vendors will provide you their SAS 70 audits. And a lot of times you may have to go back in based on your policies and standards and do a gap analysis to see where their policy is, where your policy and standards are, and make sure they line up. You also see a lot of activity around ISO 2700 series to get into the actual controls if you have control-specific requirements. And talking about vendor quick list along those lines, make sure you understand the data handling and classification. If you're moving your data into a cloud solution, where is that data going to be? How is it stored? And that means what country is it going to be in, what region, and does your privacy requirements allow that? Where does it travel? How does it go across the borders? And how do they secure their wide area networks or their public internets if they use public internet? And who has access and where are they? So you need to understand how their whole organizational approach to providing that service works and make sure it aligns with what you need to do. As Joe opened the program with, part of the impact of Sharia law and part of the understanding of international laws and regulations really drive a lot of global business now. And as you use some of these global service providers, you need to understand that, if your data is in their locality, their local laws rule the day. So, if you need to bring somebody into court and, they're in England or in the EU or somewhere else, U.S. laws may not apply. So you need to understand that before you go and do that and make sure that, you're not giving them oversensitive information in places that you ought not to put it. You're going to need to look at their physical security of their facilities. You're going to need to look at their facilities, and you're also going to want to examine their disaster recovery and business continuity plans, because if they have a critical disaster or an existential threat and all of a sudden, they go the way of the dodo, you want to make sure that you're capable of continuing to operate. Understand what their infrastructure and operational processes and procedures and practices are, around, application and platform architecture. You're going to need to look at their network infrastructure, the authentication mechanisms they use. Do they line up with how you do things? What are their operational processes? How do they do patch management? Are they on the hook for technology upgrades? If you deploy something on a piece of current technology and they aren't obligated to upgrade it, you may get down to the track and find that you have an interoperability issue if you've moved on and they haven't. Understand their infrastructure security. What are they doing with AV, IDS, incident response, and log management? Incident response is pretty critical because if they have an incident with your data, you need to have that aligned with your incident response process. Also, with logical security, and this is also very important with cloud computing, as people do virtual environments, especially with multi-tenancy, you need to know how they segregate and what controls they put in place to segregate their virtual machines from one another. So if you're sitting on one machine next to your competitors, you don't want any data leakage across that. And unfortunately, that requires some deep digging. And I'll have much more. I've got some good documents from SANS on external outsourcers, as well as offshore information criticality, and some terrific information from NIST, and that'll go up shortly.
And Mark, that's a terrific wrap on that. I can't believe you can get all that information in less than 15 minutes. This is the challenge. There's no doubt about it. And those resources, just so everybody knows, will be up on the web for 1 week. All right, Mark puts up about 7 to a full dozen of different links up there for everybody to take a look at. Mark, once again, thanks. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Joe. Have a good morning.
All right, you too.